Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. Nice little midweek check in for the Green Bay Packers as they prepare to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this coming weekend. Of course, we talked at length yesterday about the debacle that was the Packers playing in New York against the Giants. So it is time to move on. The Packers do still control their playoff destiny. Hey, Scott, I see you're here. Hello to you. Nice to see you here. Packers do still control their destiny. Scott, I know you were there, but I did misspeak at the very end of the watch party. It's because it's like a multi-team tiebreaker that the Packers still own the 7th spot, technically speaking, if the season ended today. So they're in control, and they're going against the NFC South leading Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Chris, how you doing? Nice to see you here as well. Sorry for the different time today. Normally we go live on Wednesdays at 4:30, but the personal stuff had to change up a little bit. So here we are at 2 o'clock. Do want to give you a couple updates, although to be totally frank, there's not a lot to update you on yet. Being that it was a Monday night game, the Packers did not get back into Green Bay until about 3:30 in the morning. And then they take that first day as just like a sleep-in day, basically, in rehab. And then today, I want to say they got the day off completely today, and we won't see any real notes until tomorrow. With that being said, though, there is a couple injury things that we can update you on, maybe things that you missed along the way. Big ones being Jayden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. Jayden Reed, at the end of the game, did seemingly suffer a concussion. He was being evaluated for one anyway, so that certainly puts his status for Sunday at risk. But then also Dontavian Wicks was talking to someone in the locker room after the game because he left towards the end of the game as well. Turns out it's an ankle injury, and he said that his ankle was pretty effed up. And he also said that they're thinking it may be of the high ankle variety. And of course, like if it's a low ankle sprain, he's got a chance to even come back on Sunday, maybe like a 1 week style absence. High ankle sprain, it might be a little bit. I know that kept Austin Eckler out earlier this season for about 5 weeks, and that seems to be somewhere like 3 to 6 weeks, seems to be about the average for high ankle sprains. So to lose Dontavian Wicks right now, less than ideal for the Green Bay Packers, but that may be what they're facing this coming Sunday. So let's check in with a couple here. Scott, so logged off. Barry just sucks. I mean, yeah. There were a couple positives, right, Scott? Like for the most part, they did stop Barkley, and it's clear that that was the mission. That was the directive of they still didn't tackle well, but for the most part, they did contain Barkley. But I'll tell you what, this scheme cannot defend a running quarterback to save their lives. And I'm not even willing to put Tommy DeVito in the running quarterback category. He's just nimble. And it worked to the tune of over 70 yards rushing against the Packers. I mean, and then plus you've got that final drive. Yeah. No, I'm with you. And the thing is, too, like, I understand, like, there's certainly some Joe Barry apologists out there. It's just, look, it seems like every time the defense fails, LaFleur stands up there and goes, yep, this is the call that we made, and we had this and this happen. And he doesn't totally put it on the fault of the players, but he makes it sound execution problems, right? Still the coordinator's fault. Like, if you're the coordinator and you're adapting your scheme for the particular opponent that you're doing, or the situation for the game that you're in, like there being a minute left, them still having a timeout and only needing a field goal, it still is the coordinator's job to make sure that they're in the right place to do their job. So, like, at the end of the day, it still all falls on the same guy. And they do have some nice stats out there about, like, allowing points per game. They're not that bad in that category. But if you can't play situational defense, then what the hell is the point? If your defense is only really good when the offense can at least hang in a game too, your defense is never going to win you a game that way. And this was supposed to be a year that the defense could do that while the offense was figuring out how to walk. It's time. It's time for a change. All right. So the Rigby Mordecai, hello to you. Hearing the Bucs are leading the NFC South makes me sad. Yeah, me too. And it's not good for the Packers' playoff chances either, because the Falcons do own a tiebreaker over the Packers. Of course, the game against the Bucs is still coming, but like ideal world, the Falcons, because they'd own that tiebreaker, are going to get themselves out of the wild card conversation and just win the South. That's the best possible option. So it's just buy out all the way around. Kempton boy, hello to you. Missing Watson hurt this offense more than I thought. Also, fire Joe Barry. Yeah, the Watson thing's kind of curious because earlier in the year they missed Watson too, and they were more bottled up earlier in the year, but they still found ways. They didn't exclusively use Reed as like a behind the line of scrimmage weapon, or at most have him run a curl 6 yards away from the line. But at the same time, they did in those weeks have Musgrave. And I think that kind of helped in that Musgrave you could at least send straight up the seam with his speed. Having both of them out and using Reed the way that they did, yeah, I mean, they completely bottled themselves up. I didn't like the overall plan. That's for sure. Scott saying, but at the end when they should have been aggressive, they were agree 1,000,000%. Yes. The entire plan for the entire game, like you guys know, I said I don't care if Saquon goes off for 150. I'm not going to let Tommy DeVito beat me. And they focused on Saquon, and that was not smart. It does feel like the defense didn't adapt to what was working for the Giants, and this was a game that Barry actively lost for us. Yeah, I mean, the offense going completely stagnant didn't help, but at the end, they did do enough to win. I mean, they got what should have been the game-winning touchdown. And then, and it's not even that they went a true prevent defense. Like, they still did some single high stuff in those few snaps. They still called man on at least one, because that's when Keyshawn Nixon got burned. It's just how incredibly passive they were about what they were calling. Or it being, 1st and 10, so we're going to back up 12 yards off with the hope of keeping them in bounds. But they had a minute and a timeout. Like, there's not 4 seconds left in the game where it's keep them in bounds no matter what. Like, they had time to function. So what the hell are you calling that for? I don't know. Chris, it's like we have this thing with beating big teams, but not beating little teams or rookies like 15. Maybe this can be our comeback versus Tampa Bay. Yeah, and the thing, I think it will be. That's the thing, because Tampa Bay they're a much more veteran team. They're not going to, they have times they've been sloppy this year, but they're not going to, hand you the mistakes that you would think the Giants would have, or the Giants had shown in other weeks. So I think the Packers will naturally get a little bit more ramped up for this one. Plus, they're back at home. So, yeah, I think the Packers will correct course this weekend, but they do have a tendency of playing down to their opponent. I think it's got a good little something to do with the defense. The Rigby Mordecai also saying not getting a sack against the Giants made me so mad all game. They came into the game getting an average of 5.8 sacks a game. The Giants did. Like, Tommy DeVito was getting crushed every game, and it was partly DeVito's fault. And then we couldn't get one. I know. I know. Jonathan, hello to you. Hey, John, am I scapegoating Walker and Runyon, or were they terrible on Monday? No, I don't think you're really scapegoating. I mean, there's the one play in particular that those two stand out. Like, it was the sack of Love in the second half. Walker just straight up got beat, but also at the same time, Runyon got just annihilated, pushed over backward. That's the one play that stands out, right? But on the whole, yeah, both of their performances were deficient. And I'd also chip in too, this was not Elton Jenkins' best game at left guard either, for whatever. And he had been remarkably solid over the winning streak. The entire offensive line does kind of go as Elton goes at this point. This was not his best game. It really wasn't. And even Zach Tom, who's done a remarkably good job. I'm not going to say he had a bad game against the Giants at all. But what I am going to say is he seemed to struggle more with Thibodeau than he did the likes of Khalil Mack, Aiden Hutchinson, the run of edge rushers that they've been on. So it wasn't just Walker and Runyon, although they probably were the worst of the bunch, which is a real shame because Walker had been making great progress ever since they started implementing the rotation with Yash. This was a bit of a step back for Walker in that regard. And Runyon, yeah, he's just he's just not the guy he was over the last 3 years. This 4th year for him, he looks like a different guy. And you know, I get what they're saying or what they haven't said, what hasn't been said about not wanting to play Sean Ryan in more complex situations or whatever. Maybe he's still learning, but what's the point in playing Runyon if he's just going to get run over? So yeah, I maybe it's not entirely their fault, but they sure as heck didn't help the case. That's for sure. Commando G Man, hello to you, my friend. They were so hungry for sacks, they ran past Tommy. Yeah, they really did. They over pursued a ton. And then in the second half, the Giants adjusted a lot more than the Packers did. Like, you know, in the watch party, like that one play where Slayton got a pressure before the center even completely stood up. But Slayton was just so like, I'm going to get DeVito this time. And then he didn't get DeVito because DeVito saw that coming and just went, hey, Saquon, here. And then Saquon ran for 10 yards. Like, gotta keep composure. And yeah, the edges were way over pursuing. And that allowed DeVito to step right up. Chris and our poor tackling was kind of like the cartoon of the wolf always missing. The meep character always missing. Yeah. And that's been a theme in Packer losses this year, right? Like, think back to the most egregious losses this year. The ones that come to mind are probably Atlanta, maybe Vegas. You know, like, and in those losses, the Packers could not tackle to save their lives. And now, yeah, here we go. Here's another one with the Giants. Just constant, just diving at a guy's feet, not actually impacting him. Or how many times did we see it? There's that one clip that's gone around a bunch of the Giants are on the goal line and snap the ball, and everything goes exactly as it should. The hole opens up. Devondre Campbell steps perfectly into the hole. That should be a win for the defense if your inside linebacker makes the play. And instead, Devondre Campbell steps right into the hole. Saquon kind of meets him there and then just turns to the side, and Devondre can't make the tackle. Well, that's an easy touchdown for the Giants when it should have been a win for the defense if Devondre Campbell makes that tackle. And of course, Saquon, but like, that's your one job, man. So yeah. Scott, if Watson out, maybe Melton with his speed. Well, I think if we see multiple receivers down for this game, then we might see some practice squad elevations like Bo Melton, maybe even Grant Dubose, who's been hanging out in the practice squad all year. We didn't see that this last week with just Watson being out because they were thinking like, okay, we'll make Toure an active on game day since he's still on the 53. We don't need any practice squatters. If Reed, Wicks, and Watson are out, or even two of them, yeah, then maybe. The thing is, though, with Bo Melton is they seemingly like to use him like Jaden Reed in that much more conventional slot things, maybe even a jet sweep or 40, as we've seen with LaFleur's game plan last week. They don't like to just send him or Reed just straight on down the field, which was kind of baffling because with Reed, they did it a fair amount earlier in the year. But against the Giants, they didn't do it that often. And that's probably Reed or Melton that you mentioned is probably their best chance to actually go vertical with Watson and Musgrave out. They just wasn't part of the game plan this week, I guess. And Jair Rewind, hello. Hi to you. So, yeah. And speaking of Jair, I know there's lots of conversation on Jair. I put out my stance. I'll say it again. I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. I know not everyone agrees with that. I don't think Jair is just chilled in there going, yeah, I'm not going to play this week. I don't want to. Like, no, I never believed that with Bakhtiari. I continue to not believe it with Jair. I think that there's a lot of nuance in the conversation of you can get a limited practice designation and for a lot of guys, a lot of types of injuries that may make you able to play because you're at least getting something going, right? Well, with a shoulder injury and a cornerback, it's possible that he can do a limited practice because they're not actually hitting each other. But then the second he tries to hit with that shoulder, it goes bad. Yeah, then he's not going to play. I just think people are really way blowing this out of proportion and coming at Jair. No, the optics aren't great. The Packers do him no favors in that regard, just like they didn't do Bakhtiari favors in that regard for years by not talking about it. But I just think you got a dude who's hurt and he's trying to get back to 100% so he can come back and actually play at the level that we need him to and he's used to. And I don't fault him for that one bit. So, all right, I can hang around for a couple more minutes if anybody's got any more questions. Looking ahead to Tampa Bay, I know I'm going to put out my game preview on Friday, but just want to give you a quick rundown. Offensively, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 20th or worse in both passing and rushing offense. That's good. Defensively, they are top 10 against the run, bottom 3 against the pass, which frankly was a little bit surprising. And they've been better over their last couple games. But overall in the year, they are bottom 3 in pass defense. So getting Watson back this week, if the Packers are able to do so and can actually stretch the field a little bit, or they actually use Reed in that way if he plays, or even Bo Melton, as Scott mentions, it could become a big factor in this game, actually executing against what's kind of become a disappointing Buccaneers secondary. And they've got some real talent there. It's just, hasn't been performing to expectations in Tampa, the secondary at least. The Rigby Mordecai saying, also, I get the Jones is out, but was our only solution to run jet sweeps that the Giants were reading? No, it wasn't. That's the thing. Like Patrick Taylor, I get that the Giants are not the ideal matchup for AJ Dillon. And the reason why I say that is because you generally, like all year, it's been the case that you can run against the Giants more successfully if you can get guys in space. That's how you can execute better against their defense. Well, it's not Dillon, right? Like Dillon's just going to truck right into what they give him. The thing that I was incredibly disappointed with Dillon was I felt like a lot of the creativity that LaFleur showed with getting Dillon carries against Kansas City was completely vacant in this game. Earlier in the year, part of the reason Dillon was so rough at times was because it was just straight up like, we might as well call it off the Madden play sheet. Halfback toss to the left, flip it, halfback toss to the right, halfback dive, straight up the middle. We're in shotgun, halfback draw, straight up the middle. But then against Kansas City, we saw some motion on run plays. We saw different ways to get the ball into Dillon's hands that messed with the timing a little bit, and it was successful. But then against the Giants, it felt not completely, but certainly a departure backwards to take ball, run ball, hit dude, gain 2. And that just, it left a lot to be desired. And I get that it's not the ideal game for Dillon because of the Giants matchup, but like still, do some creativity to help him out. And Patrick Taylor was running the ball pretty well. It's just as the game started kind of ticking down there in the second half, the Packers again abandoned the run, with the exception of the occasional Patrick Taylor carry. It's a game I really wouldn't have minded. I know the circumstances dictated he wasn't going to play much, but it's a game I wouldn't have minded seeing if Kenyon Drake could do something as a receiver out of the backfield rather than using Jaden Reed exclusively in that role. Have Reed go do other stuff. He's capable of more stuff like running down the field. Have Drake do some of that kind of jet sweep small stuff. It's just, I don't know. It was very, very concerning, very disappointing from a schematic standpoint. This was not LaFleur's best in any way. Chris, John, I was watching some more Lombardi history and once again sunk into the amazing history. If you had a chance with a 5-minute interview with Lombardi, what would you ask him? If I had 5 minutes with Lombardi, I actually wouldn't talk about football at all. See, like Lombardi in his time was obviously a brilliant football technician, right? But that's not what he was best at. What he was really best at was culture, motivation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or even in that time in 1960s Wisconsin, standing up to the adversity of, yes, I am going to employ African-American players, which was still a pretty big deal in the NFL at that point, especially culturally speaking for where people were. And I would ask him about leadership in the face of adversity. But then I'd also kind of make sure I'd get some wrinkles about like what was some of the gossip of the team at the time, because stuff that hasn't been reported, right? But I would pick his brain over how he became the leader of men that he became in such an effective manner. When he himself wasn't exactly like a Hall of Fame player. He just knew people better than anybody else. And I would ask him all about that. Wonderful question, Chris. Rigby Mordecai. Oh, yeah. Speaking of Taylor, I cannot believe that he failed to get out of bounds again this week. Yeah. See, okay, the thing is, there was some conversation last week about Taylor like being told by the coaching staff to stay in bounds, to run the clock farther down. And I didn't like it, but I understood the rationale. If that is what occurred, because last week you didn't see LaFleur screaming down the sideline or anything like that at Taylor, which kind of does lend itself to the logic of like, well, maybe they told him to take some time. This week, oh, buddy, no, that was just straight up a mistake. And you knew it too. As soon as Taylor stood up after being tackled, it's like he got the wires crossed and he's like, all right, listen to last week's directions. We're in the same situation. But I mean, as soon as he stood up, LaFleur was screaming at him. The one camera angle caught it of like LaFleur. You saw the back of LaFleur's head screaming at Taylor, and Taylor, like in his helmet, you could just see his face go, God. Yeah, straight up mental error. I don't know if it was last week, but certainly Monday. That was definitely a mistake on the part of Patrick Taylor. All right, so one more question here from Martine. Nice and early Q&A. Yeah, a little bit earlier today. Glad you could join us. And you probably are the last question, though. Usually it's in the middle of the night in Europe. Where do you see more growth this season? Quarterback, wide receiver, or tight end? I'm not going to say quarterback because I think Jordan Love has just kind of become what we expected him to be. So that's more of like a meeting expectations type deal. Whereas with wide receiver, we've seen growth or perhaps been surprised by the immediate play of the guys we weren't necessarily expecting. And then tight end, what the freak did we make a tight end considering that it was all rookies coming into the year? With the exception of Josiah DeGuara, who ultimately, honestly, has been pretty disappointing. So I guess in terms of growth, I have to say the tight end position. Tucker Kraft is really coming on nicely. Like he's becoming a bona fide player in this offense. He played every single offensive snap the other night. That's really commendable for a third-round rookie who's supposed to be your number 2 tight end, maybe number 3, depending on the situation. And then before Musgrave suffered that injury, you did see signs of growth from him too. I don't know as if there were things that he was necessarily doing better, but certainly the chemistry between he and Love was growing, especially deeper down the field when Musgrave kept on his feet. So I guess in terms of starting in one place, but ascending to better play, I'd have to say overall the tight end position because of Kraft and Musgrave. But the wide receivers are certainly in that conversation in that they've gotten better too, but Dobbs and Watson have kind of been as expected. So I wouldn't say that they've grown a lot. And I think maybe Reed and Wicks are just better than advertised. And certainly Malik Heath as a UDFA is making the occasional play that's better than we thought when they initially signed him after the draft. So I guess growth, I got to go with tight end. More impressive out of nowhere startup, I would probably go with the wide receiver position. And as for Love, obviously over the last month, he's played fantastically, but I think we've seen him just kind of become what so many Packer fans thought he could be based upon that Philadelphia game last year, based upon training camp, based upon preseason. Like all signs were pointing to him becoming this guy, and we were hoping that he would send farther. He's just actually that guy now, last game notwithstanding. So, all right, everybody, thanks for joining me on a Wednesday. It is time to be getting out of here. I do hope you enjoyed this Q&A from Lombardi Time Brews. I'll be back on Friday with a game preview of Packers versus Buccaneers. And yes, there will be a watch party this coming Sunday. Just me for the first half, but Claudia will join us for the second half. So tune in on Sunday to the watch party. Let's hang out. Let's talk Packers together. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you're having a great week. And as always, Go Pack Go.